Good morning. I'm here with Lieutenant Colonel Dennis Drain, Air Force retired. Denny and I were classmates in high school, graduated class of '65, and we're at our 50th class reunion. Denny, introduce your, talk about whatever you want to tell us about.
Okay. Class of '65. Just in general, I'm very happy to be here. I've been to every class reunion we've had, I believe. We had a great class. I don't know of anybody else that I know of that's had the kind of camaraderie and friendship with their class that we have. Anyway, started out, went to Eastward with basically a third of the classmates. Had some good times there. I don't remember too much detail about that. Lived on East 3rd Street in McCook. Lived there basically my whole life, in McCook anyway. Went to high school, or junior high school here with everybody. Went on to the University of, or McCook Junior College and the University of Nebraska. I always wanted to be, as long as I can remember, I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to fly. I assumed that came from my Uncle Merwin, who was a pilot in the Navy in World War II. I recall him flying an airplane out here in the early 50s sometime, probably one of my earlier memories. He actually landed at the old Army Air Base, and when the family went up there to see him, of course we couldn't go fly with him, but we all went and saw the airplane.
Do you remember what kind of airplane it was?
No, it was a Navy, it might have been a PBY or something like that.
It was a bigger airplane.
Yeah, it was a bigger airplane. It wasn't a fighter. I think in World War II he flew PBYs as well. He was not a fighter pilot. He wasn't on a carrier, I don't believe. But
PBY, that's an amphibious airplane.
Amphibious airplane, right. So anyway, I think probably because of him, I always wanted to be a pilot. And I remember when the Frontier Airlines first came here, I went out, paid $5 to go get a ride, and they were giving everybody locally rides for $5. They gave you like a half-hour ride or something in a DC-3. When they first got here, I just thought that was a great deal. I don't know, it was probably in late 50s when they first came here. So, and again, I've always wanted to fly. So after when I was in McCook Junior College, I took the Air Force ROTC pilot test, and whatever their qualification test was. Passed that and got accepted to the Air Force ROTC, the 2-year program. So I went and did that. Went to my summer camp in March Air Force Base in California, right between the sophomore and junior years in college. Then went to Nebraska for the 2 years, graduated from there, and then went into the Air Force.
Where'd you go to pilot training?
I went to pilot training at Advanced Air Force Base, Enid, Oklahoma. Another good group. I just had a reunion with them last weekend. It was a year-long process, as Steve knows. It was a good time. A lot of hard work. I always thought before I went there, I thought I was a natural flyer, but I wasn't. I really had to work at being a pilot, and but I still enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. I graduated from there.
How many were there in your class? Remember, or your flight?
The flight. We probably graduated about 40 or 45.
Probably pretty good size then.
Yeah. We actually the whole class together started with close to 200.
Oh.
And we only graduated not 80 or 90 of them graduated from pilot training in the both sections, I think. So from there went to special ops school and learned how to fly the O2 and how to do forward air control business. And went to the Air Force Survival School in Spokane, and then pretty soon deployed to Vietnam, stopping at the Philippines on the way for Jungle Survival School. Everybody went over there, went to Jungle Survival School.
Yeah, we call it Snake School.
Snake School, yeah. Interesting place, actually, but it was a pretty interesting week there.
You remember what month that was in 1971?
It was 1971, it was October. I left mid to late October, I forget exactly the exact date, 1971. Just spent a week in the Philippines and then went on to, actually first landed in Cameron Bay. The way the fax system was set up there, that was the main headquarters. From there, they decided which base you were going to go to. So I spent 4 or 5 days at Cameron just waiting for an assignment, and then was assigned to Da Nang Air Base, the 20th TAS at Da Nang. There I flew O2As. It's a military version of the Cessna Skymaster. Started flying there in November sometime when they had a checkout process, a qualification process, and then before you could go out and direct airstrikes on your own, you had to go through this process. One of the stories that I probably shouldn't, one of the stupid things I've done, one of the many dumb things I've done in my life is where they teach you and tell you, when you're flying, especially in O2s, we shot rockets to mark the ground, and probably any kind of airplane, you don't repeat things because there's enemies down on the other side too. So, so I was out there on a solo mission, and during my qualification period, this was right after I got there. So you normally go out there, do area orientation, just fly. You're not qualified to direct airstrikes, but you could take targets. You can get familiar with the area and everything. I was doing that. At the end of this period, we're usually out there for 3.5 hours. So 3.5, 4 hours. And at the end of that period, we usually got rid of whatever rockets we had, just practicing. Mm-hmm. So on the way back, I saw this destroyed truck along the road, but it was sitting kind of back up in the tree, so you couldn't see it, but from a couple angles. And so I was going to practice shooting at that truck.
What kind of altitude were AGL were you flying?
This was probably 2,000 or 3,000 feet AGL, something like that. It wasn't too low. We generally flew between 15 and 2,000 feet AGL over the mountains out there. Anyway, so I started rolling in on this stupid truck. I'd roll in, fire a rocket, see how I did. Come back around, roll in and fire another rocket. And see, I did that 2 or 3 times. And like an idiot, I did it from the same position almost every time. Same angle, same level. At one point, after on the 3rd pass or so, I started hearing this popping noise, like a snap like this. And I thought it was something in the airplane. At first, I pulled off. I never heard it before. I didn't know what it was. Nothing was wrong with the airplane. Everything was fine. So I went and did it again. Heard more snapping noises. And the 4th or 5th time that I pulled up, I actually saw an anti-aircraft fire burst, and I was close enough that I smelled the cordite and stuff, and it finally dawned on me that they were shooting at me. I didn't know that before. They were getting close enough to me that I could hear the shell go by. That's what I was hearing, was the subsonic or supersonic sound of the shell going by. That was a snapping noise I was hearing. That was one of the. I guess I was lucky to survive after all that, but they didn't hit me. I did learn though that wasn't. Or I relearned that was not the way to do things. So I never did that again, of course. But pretty lucky to get away with that. But I learned what gunfire sounds like in the air. I learned what it smells like, and most of my flying over there actually was at nighttime. At nighttime, they used tracers on their guns, and you could see the tracers, and so they were a lot easier to avoid when you can see them, of course. And I got to be not comfortable, but okay with. You could fairly quickly pick out how close the rounds were going to be to you by, from their trajectory. So you didn't have to worry. You knew when to worry, when not to worry about them. But again, I never had a problem like that again. So fortunately, I survived that.
How was it to fly over there at night? I'm sure there weren't a lot of lights down below to help you navigate.
No, it was tough. At night, we flew with 2 people in the airplane. When I first got there, we had a navigator that flew in the right seat with us, and about halfway through my tour there, they pulled all the navigators, and so we had to start flying 2 pilots. Just took turns flying the left or right seat. The guy in the right seat, we had a low-level light scope, one of the early night vision scopes. It was the first ones were really basic. You looked through them, you could see green, basic green stuff, and it wouldn't allow with moonlight. You could pick out trails. You could see some things. With a full moon, with a bright moon, you could see pretty clearly. We had later on we got a better scope. It was a little bit bigger. It was much better vision out of the scope. It still wasn't a very precise way of doing things, and compared to the modern way with the smart bombs and stuff. But the guy in the right seat basically directed the strikes at night. The pilot flew at night. We didn't carry rockets. We carried flares and ground marks. Big phosphorus, or not phosphorus, but it was a big container that you would drop, and it would burn on the ground for 20 minutes or so. We also had some flares that we dropped that were held up by parachutes, so you could light up the area below.
These were all things hanging on your wings?
Right, right.
So you didn't crank open the window and drop them out like World War I?
No, we didn't do that. I actually had a navigator that threw out hand grenades out a couple times, but it wasn't supposed to do that, but he did. Anyway, yeah. So the guy in the right seat generally directed the airstrikes at night, because you would find a target, you would drop the ground marks as close as you could. It wasn't it wasn't very precise. You had to judge the wind, try to drop 2 marks so you could have a reference point. Then you would direct the fighters based on the 2 marks and where the target was in relation to the 2 marks. The target is halfway between them, or you draw an angle to the north, a triangle to the northeast, and that's where the target is. Or that was, it wasn't as precise as you would think, but we actually did hit a lot more targets than you might guess doing it that way.
Did you actually talk to the fighters, or did you talk to an ABCCC? And then
we actually did both. There were, the way it ran, they had some scheduled flight attacks out there where they had pre-planned targets where you go out and you knew the target ahead of time. And they also had like pop-up targets where you'd find a moving truck or a line of trucks or something you could call to ask for air support. And ABCCC was who we called for the air support. We checked in with them. They were there all the time, day and night. Moonbeam at night, and something else was a call sign in the daytime. Hillsborough, I think it was. So if you needed a strike attack, you would call Moonbeam and ask if there was any air available. If there was, they would generally divert one of these pre-planned strikes for a live target. So if you had a live target, they would divert that target to you. When they got to you, you would talk to them, and then you would direct the FAC directed all the airstrikes.
Did you have the same call sign while you were there?
I did. My call sign was Covey 296. Covey, the 20th task at Da Nang, all of our pilots had a Covey call sign. So you could tell when you were out there, like during the Lamb Song thing, they had nails out on KP, had a nail call sign. You could generally tell where they were from. Once you were there long enough, you could tell even the fighters where they were from. The Navy ships had specific call signs, so you could learn what ship they were from based on their call sign.
How long were you there before you really felt comfortable with the job? Or do you ever get comfortable with it?
Well, you kind of got comfortable. I don't know. It took a while. They don't let you direct airstrikes on your own for a month. I mean, if you're going out to direct an airstrike, we had an instructor with you or something before that time. So you had to do 30 days doing solo flights, flying with an instructor, that kind of stuff. But then a lot of it just learning as you go. And it was so much, so variable every time. What the target was, what the type of ordnance the airplanes had, where they were coming from. what the weather was like, what the ground fire was like. You had to direct, if you were taking ground fire, which we often did, you had to make sure you told the fighters where it was coming from or where to expect it to come from, how they should turn off the target to get away from it and stuff like that. So it probably took at least a month after I started going out by myself, before I was.
Because you were still really learning the O2 also.
Oh yeah, except that was a pretty basic airplane to fly. It wasn't that you could almost take your hands off of it, hands and feet off of it. Once it had the power set and it had it trim, you could almost take your hands off of it and fly okay. And as long as you had, and for that matter, a lot of times we flew with the rudders in that airplane out in the area because you were doing stuff with your hands. You were writing stuff down. We almost had an emergency if you didn't have a grease pencil out there. Because, we wrote on the windows, we wrote on our pads, and, you had to write down the information for the airplane, for the fighters that were coming in, call signs, times, and what kind of stuff they had. After they dropped their bombs, as much as you could, you tried to do an assessment, a damage assessment, BDA, bomb damage assessment, so that you would write that stuff down because they had to report all that when you got back.
So how long was the standard mission? 3.5 hours?
Standard mission was 3.5, 4 hours. It took us about a half hour to get out there from Da Nang and about a half hour to get back, so roughly.
You were on site about 2.5 hours then?
Oh, no, it was actually the full flight was about 4.5 hours.
Oh.
We were on site about 3.5 hours, depending on where it was that you actually went. So that's from Da Nang, our primary zone was in Laos. All my flying was in Laos, along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and it was just south in the DMZ, down, I'm not sure what was the low end of that, Saravane or something like that. Almost all my flying was on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Most of it nighttime, some little bit of daytime stuff.
Because that's when they moved at nighttime.
Yeah, they did move a lot at night. They also moved some during the day, but they did a lot at night. Of course, history says that we didn't really stop very much, and we probably didn't in the big picture. We did what we could. They were so good at rebuilding the trails when you destroy them, and it wasn't a very efficient kind of a warfare, but what we had at the time. And,
what were the living conditions like when you were back on the base?
For pilots, it wasn't too bad. It's not like being out in the jungle with the Marines and the Army were. We did at the unit I was in. We had some old French buildings at Da Nang. They were concrete buildings, or they were probably foot-thick concrete all over the places. So they were pretty secure. Da Nang got rocketed a lot. We had rockets not every night, but fairly frequently. But our building was real solid. Our building never got hit. We had the real small room. Probably two of us slept in bunk beds. Had a room for the bunk beds, a couple big metal lockers, and a small desk in the middle, and that was it. It wasn't much room at all.
It was air conditioned?
It was air conditioned.
Did you buy it from the person that left before?
No.
That's how we did it in NKP.
Oh yeah? No, this was part of it came with it. One of the advantages of being a pilot again was you had air conditioned quarters. It was good. We had maids that took care of the place. That was my first. I didn't, for some reason, I didn't get any of the marijuana stuff when I was in college, which was big at the time. But I just, not because I had anything against it, I just was never happened to be around anybody that did it. But that was my first smell of marijuana. The maids smelled or smoked marijuana in our churches. You'd walk out of your room and be overcome by a big cloud of marijuana that the maids were doing. So it was kind of interesting.
So how long were you there?
I was there for pretty close to a full year. I think I got there, I think I got there on October 19th. That's when I actually got into Da Nang, or into Vietnam. And I left pretty much right, I don't know exactly, but it was real close to right on a year. within a few days of being a year. A couple of another story that I know from there. One time I was out in the area. It was late in the morning, right before sunup. So I was out there, and it wasn't me, but somebody had been directing a strike of Navy fighters against a target out there, and one of them got shot down. One of the Navy guys got shot down. And the guy that had been working with the airstrike finally got in contact with him. He was on the ground, okay, and the guy was in contact with him. But he said I finally got on site, and so he turned over the cover to me.
Mm-hmm.
The rescue couldn't do anything in the middle of the night. There's nothing they could do in the dark. Mm-hmm. So I was out there during that time, and I just kept in contact with the guy on the ground. Every 45 minutes or half hour, we'd call each other and make sure that they're safe, and if not, that he's not being pursued or anything. He seemed to be okay, but sometime during that time they started moving, because the other thing that the Vietnamese did was they used ground downed airmen as bait for their guns. So they started moving in guns so they'd be ready when the rescue team showed up. Anyway, so they started shooting at me because I was just, they couldn't see me. We flew without lights, so I'm sure they couldn't see me, but they could hear me up there, and they were shooting at the sound, I'm sure. But man, I got as much fire then as I've had at any one mission, I think. And one of them, they had two basic guns that they used, a 23 millimeter and a 37 millimeter. The 27 millimeter fired 7 or 8 rounds at a time. And the 37 fired 4, I think, at a time. And they all used tracers for some reason. I'm not sure why they would do that. But and I was just circling around this area. I didn't know, because I didn't know exactly where he was either. But I was circling around the area and looking out the window on my left side, circling to the left, just watching to see what I could see. And I saw something I don't usually see. As I saw the muzzle flashes of the gun. It was a 37 because there were 4 of them, and I was apparently looking right down the barrel when it fired. So I started pulling. Like, the other thing is, when you see tracers, if you can see the trajectory, it's probably not going to hit you. But this, I didn't. All I saw was a little dot. I didn't see a trajectory of it. So I thought it was coming. They were coming right at me. So I started pulling and diving toward what I thought was pulling away from them. I must have been pulling into their trajectory, actually. I just couldn't get away from the little dot. It was just a continual dot, and eventually it came close enough to the airplane that it lit up the bottom of the plane when the 4 shells went past, but they missed. I was about the scariest I've ever been out there. I thought for sure they had me, because I kept pulling and nothing changed. So I apparently was pulling right into the path of the trajectory of the shell, and with that airplane I couldn't really do much else but turn and pull. So.
Were they able to recover the pilot?
The next morning, I turned it over. People came out, and I had to leave. When it was getting light, I was out of my time. Turned it over to the next FAC. They did come in that next morning, and they did have a lot of fire, ground fire, but they had to suppress that first. But they got the pilot out.
Yeah.
So that was one of the interesting things that I saw during time. The other thing is I got to spend a week on the battleship on the carrier Midway while I was out there. They had an exchange program with the Navy. Sometimes the ships that were out in the Gulf of Tonkin providing the fighters, we would do a little pilot exchange. They'd come fly with us, and we'd go fly with them. So I got to go out to the ship, to the Midway, spend a week on the Midway. Got to fly in the back seat of an F-4 on a strike mission a couple times, and an A-3. I got 4 flights off the carrier. Got to experience. I wasn't flying, of course. I was in the back seat, but I got to experience the landing and the catapult takeoffs on the carrier. So
those landings look scary to me.
Yeah, it was interesting though. When the one landing, I didn't realize. Being not familiar with it, the guy, when he landed an F-4, he's got a wheel cover on the outside of it, he hit it so hard, hit the ground, the deck so hard it broke that wheel cover off and hit the wing. And I didn't. They showed me afterwards what had happened, but the deck, he hit the deck pretty hard sometime. This was a good pilot too. It wasn't anything he did wrong. It was pretty normal, I guess.
Were those flights at night also?
No, these were daytime flights. Yeah, it wasn't a nighttime flight. It was still an interesting time. Got to spend a week on a USS Midway, which is now a museum in San Diego. So it was interesting. Then went from there, went back to flying, came back to the States, and eventually ended up flying a KC-135.
Is that the aircraft you were assigned when you came back?
No, actually, I came back to fly. I originally came back to fly, do T-38s as an instructor, but they were changing things, so I didn't got that assignment. That assignment got changed before I got qualified, and they sent me to 135s.
So you didn't have to go fly back in Vietnam in KC-135s?
No. Well, no, never in Vietnam. We went back. We flew out of Guam and Okinawa and Utapao, Thailand, refueling fighters that were going into Vietnam.
Oh, okay. So you actually got another tour over there.
Yeah, but we never actually went in over Vietnam itself. Or I didn't even go over Cambodia. The flying I did, we flew in the Gulf of Tonkin or Laos.
How long were those missions?
They were, well, they varied from 4 or 5 hours. Going from Guam, going down the Gulf of Tonkin, some of those were 9 or 10 hour missions long. 9 or 10 hours, I think, something like that. I don't remember sure, but from Guam to the Gulf of Tonkin was a pretty good haul. Flew out of there, flew out of Okinawa, flew out of Utapao in KC-135.
How long did you fly the 135?
I flew it from 1971 or 72, I guess, through. I actually flew till 76, and then I had a what are they called, a tour to give me career broadening tour. I went to a computer facility in Myrtle Beach.
Oh. Did you know anything about computers before then?
Nope. I was the chief of the computer facility at Myrtle Beach for 3 years. I learned something a little bit about them, but it was a good assignment. Then I went back to tankers for another 5 or 6 years up in Grand Forks. So, and then that was my last tanker flight was 1985, I think, 84, something like that. And,
how did you like flying the KC-135?
I really liked it. It was good. It was fun. I got to go do all of the levels of everything you can do, and I got to be a regular pilot. And I was a flight commander. I was an instructor, a standard valve instructor.
Oh, one of those real popular guys.
Yeah. So I got to do it all. Got to do some interesting flying. Of course, like I said, I went to Guam and Utapao and stuff several times over there. Also went to Spain, to England, to Portugal, or actually the Azores, not Portugal.
How many flying hours did you log in your career?
About 3,000 altogether. 1,000 of it is combat time, and then about 2,000 in the tanker. Something like that. So interesting things. Got in the 80s they were working. I think it was the early 80s. They were working with Egypt. We had trying to do some things with Egypt to prove they could drop bombs in the Middle East without having to deploy over there. So we got to take off, go to the Azores, and then we were there for a couple days, and then some bombers came by from Minot. I think they came from Minot. They were going to Egypt. They were going to do nonstop from Minot to Egypt and back.
B-52?
B-52s, and drop bombs in Egypt, practice bombs. So we got to refuel them when they came by the Azores. We went up and met them, refueled them, came back, refueled, and met them again when they came back out from there. That was a pretty interesting little trial to prove that they could. I guess they had a bunch of dignitaries there in Egypt to watch when they came to drop the bombs, they had dignitaries there to see the show that what they could do.
Did
I
you?
guess they proved the concept. They could bomb in the Middle East from North Dakota. Conventional bombs, not nuclear bombs, conventional bombs.
If you look back at the 28 years you spent in the Air Force, is there a particular assignment that you really felt rewarding in doing?
Actually, that's kind of a difficult question, but I think I had the most responsibility when I was a second lieutenant, or first lieutenant in Vietnam. You know, you were responsible for basically people's lives and for, a lot more directly responsible for stuff there than anything else. I had the most responsibility I had was when I was a lieutenant, I think. And it wasn't, not that I would want to do it again, but it was a real interesting job.
Did you stay in touch with any of the friends you made over there while you were at Da Nang?
No, not really. I ran into them occasionally. There was an OV-10 pilot that I happened to be. They also went back to flying tankers. To flying tankers. I ran into him a couple of times. Trying to think. I had a good friend that was in my pilot training class that went over there. I stayed in touch with him for a little while. He eventually died of pancreatic cancer in the late 80s or late 90s.
Were there any from ROTC at Nebraska that went to pilot training with you advanced?
Bill Winkler. Do you
Yeah,
remember
he got a regular commission right out of out of university. Yeah.
He was in my pilot training class. I don't know what happened to him. I know he flew OV-10s out of pilot training. He got OV-10s, and he came. I saw him. He came through Da Nang while I was stationed there. I believe he came through there. And I saw him just briefly, kind of in passing. But I don't know what happened to him after that. I haven't seen or heard from him after that. But yeah, we went to pilot training together.
Because I remember I stopped down as I went to Randolph and saw you guys.
Yeah.
And I think so. That would have been October. You were probably transitioning to 38, or were in the 38s then.
Probably just 37s, wasn't it, right now? We
You
started
went
in June. We had, 4 weeks, a month of T-41.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess so. I've forgotten that.
I don't remember for sure.
Yeah, it probably was.
I think we only had 6 months of the T-38, I think. So I think we started the T-38 in December or January, so it probably would have been T-37 before that. But anyway, yeah, Bill was in ROTC with us and went to pilot training with me. Again, I don't remember what. And I may have had contact with him after that. I don't even remember for sure, but it's been a long time since I've contacted him.
How would you describe your experience of spending 28 years in the Air Force? It's a big organization, like private business, things like that, and the people you worked with.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure. I probably actually spent a few years too many in the Air Force, but just family situations and stuff. A lot of my pilot training classmates had actually got out and flew with the airlines. The airlines were hiring big and heavy during that time, and I had thought about doing that, but my other life situations with family and stuff, it just never coordinated or coincided at the right time to do that. To get out, I either couldn't afford to take that cut and pay, or for various reasons, I was just never in a position to go do that, or at least never made the effort to go do that. So a lot of my friends didn't stay in; they went to fly the airliners, which would have been a good job too. But I had a lot of good jobs in the Air Force. Went to the Pentagon for a while. I spent 4 years at the Pentagon, or actually 3 years in the Pentagon, then 1 year working as a operational liaison officer with the FAA, which again was kind of a good job. I got to participate in international treaty negotiations. At that time they had an overflight, what they called an overflight treaty, for the countries, Russia and other former Soviet countries, they had to have permission to fly over our country. So we had a treaty that allowed them, showed what they could and couldn't do. I got to participate in the State Department. Wow. Participate's probably a little bit of an exaggeration. I got to sit in on as a consultant with the real negotiators on building that treaty. And then it was my job as the chairman of this overflight committee to approve flights that went over the U.S. So when Russia wanted to send us one of their big monster airplanes, I can't remember the name of it now.
The Bear?
No, not the Bear. That's a different story, actually. Yeah. But they have these big cargo planes, bigger than the C-5, that they used to. That the people in this country bought things over there like ramps for airline ramps and other stuff that they would ship over here, and so they would file a flight plan from wherever they were coming, and they would file it with the FAA, and I'd have to approve whether they could fly that route or not, depending on. They couldn't overfly. There were certain areas they could not overfly. So I had to approve all the flights that came over from Russia, from East Germany or Poland or any of those countries that were former Soviet countries. I had to do that for a year. That was kind of interesting. I'd call up the guy. I had a contact over in Russia. I'd call and talk to about if I needed him to make changes or something or whatever. It was just an interesting job. I don't think they even do that anymore because of the way the situation in the world is nowadays. They probably don't do that stuff anymore. I don't know. But that was late '80s, right after the fall of the wall.
Sure. What was your last assignment in the Air Force? Where were you?
My last assignment in the Air Force was Hill Air Force Base. I was the plans officer for the 388th Fighter Wing at Hill Air Force Base. Another strange way the Air Force does things. I've never been a fighter pilot, never flown the F-16, but they sent me to Hill to be the plans officer for the 388th Fighter Wing, flew F-16s. I could do it. I did it okay. I mainly could do it because there were people there, experienced, smart people there, NCOs that really knew business. So we put on exercises, basically what we did. We ran the annual exercises where we test whether the wing could do their job. So it wasn't. I didn't have to be able to fly. I just had to be able to manage and organize and stuff. So. Well,
by that time in your service, that's what you are as a manager.
Yeah. So I was a little bit out of place because I had never been an F-16 pilot, but it worked out okay. I spent my last 4 years in the service there. So
when you retired, though, you went back as a GS something,
working
for that?
When I retired at Hill in 1997, I think it was, I went and got my real estate license. I spent a couple of years doing real estate. I wasn't very good at it. I didn't like it for whatever reason. One of those. I don't know if it was. I didn't like it because I wasn't good at it, or wasn't good at it because I didn't like it. I'm not sure which was which. Sure. But I did that for a couple of years, and I kept trying to get back on with civil service. It wasn't real easy to get on. They had to have a specific job available and stuff. So eventually, I got a job with civil service in 2001. So I started working there. Worked there for 13 years for the Air Force again at Hill Air Force Base. Civil service doing project management stuff for a system that tracked hazardous waste and hazardous material for all the services. And all the services use it to some degree. So another interesting job, required a good bit of travel though and stuff. But so I'm spending 13 years in working for the government in the Air Force. And finally retired at the end of May last year.
Are you enjoying retirement?
I am. Yeah, it's been real good. I still have a lot of things I need to do or want to do, but I'm just not doing it quite as fast as I used to.
None of us do.
So it's been good.
One thing you glanced over real quick was your time in high school, because we played football and basketball together.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because sports was an important part of our
Yes.
academics. I mean, our high school time.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I really enjoyed it. I wasn't, I did okay in football. I was a decent high school football player. I really liked playing basketball, but I wasn't any good at it. So I didn't make, I think I might have made the team as a sophomore. I'm pretty sure I did, but after that I never made the team. I did track. I ran sprints in track, did okay. Actually got a partial scholarship at McCook Junior College in track.
Really?
I only ran it the first year though there, and that was about it. Again, I was not a great athlete, but I enjoyed it. I had fun.
It was kind of nice being part of the team, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah. I really enjoyed the football particularly.
Yeah, well, you played halfback, didn't you?
Halfback and safety. Yeah, I really enjoyed the football part of it. I also like baseball. I'm a big baseball fan. I played baseball my whole life. Started, I guess we were 8 years old. We had the first Little League level games. I think was 8 years old, I think. When I started playing, I played every summer after that. We played, every summer we played baseball all the time when it wasn't working. We even, Fred Seals, Gary Killian, Larry Rothmeyer. So we actually, when we were, I think between our maybe junior and senior year or somewhere in there, we formed our own baseball team. Didn't have the time. American Legion was great, but it took a lot of time, and most of us couldn't afford the time to go play American Legion, but we still wanted to play. So we formed our own team, got our own coach. Gary's brother, I think, was our coach, and came up with our own. We went and begged and borrowed equipment, got that, and we started, and we just played whoever would play us. And we played games in Indianola and Bartley and Oberlin and small towns that had teams. We'd go play them.
Did you have a name for the team?
We did. I've been trying to think of what it was called.
Okay.
that we called ourselves.
What kind of jobs did you have in high school? You said you had to work.
Well, mostly in the summertime was farm type jobs, working on the farms. I had some cousins, I think, or some distant relatives that had a farm out in south of McCook. I worked there a couple summers, hoeing beets, whatever I could do, we did. Baling hay, a lot of what we did was baling hay or picking up bales of hay in the summertime. The last couple of years I did some construction work around town, working. Well, I think it was Johnson Lumber or Johnson Construction. I think it is.
Could be.
I don't remember, but doing some at the church is up by the college with the round.
Oh, the Baptist church.
Baptist church up there. I'd help build that, pour the concrete floors in the basement. Built some houses out here on the east side. And, not built them, but helped work construction with it. All kinds of different construction jobs. Did some roofing for a while.
Well, you went down to Lincoln in '67 or '8 or whatever it was. Did you stay down there the whole time, or come back in summer? Or you have to...
Actually, after I went down there, I stayed down there. I the first year I worked at Hinky Ninky store in Lincoln. Then sometime during that year, I got a job out in Lincoln Aviation at the airport, and so I worked out there the rest of the time while I was in college.
Did you room with anybody that was from McCook when you were in Lincoln?
Well, when I first moved out there, Fred Seals, I actually stayed with him. He was married already at the time. I stayed with him for a little while, and then I eventually moved in with a guy from Omaha, another ROTC guy from Omaha, who I can't remember his name now. But
I have that same problem.
I should remember his name. But so I moved in with him. I stayed down in Lincoln, in a basement apartment the rest of the time.
Because the housing was really pretty cheap down there, wasn't it?
Pretty cheap, yeah. So, But, and I felt like I wasn't, it wasn't Steve or, Fred never made me feel that way. But I just personally felt like I was having an imposition on living with them, so.
Sure.
As
Young
soon as I
married
could,
couple.
as soon as I could, I moved out of there, so. It was great that they were allowing me to stay and stuff, and it worked out great, but, as soon as I could, I moved. But I worked at Hinky for a while, and I worked for Lincoln Aviation after that. And I stayed there during the summer too. Got, fall of '68, I met Paul Newman out there at Lincoln Aviation.
Really?
Yeah, Paul, he and Joanne Woodward came in there. They were actually campaigning for Gene McCarthy. No, Gene for president. Ran for president in '68. Anyway, they were on a campaign trip for him. Came in a small airplane. Joanne Woodward, she stayed in the airplane. She didn't get out, but they needed to refuel, and they needed Paul got out, came into the office. We sat around and talked to him. We ran down to a liquor store and bought him a bottle of liquor or something. I forget what it was, Crown Royal or something that he wanted, and talked to him for 45 minutes or so, and had a nice little conversation with him, just sitting in the. It was pretty late at night. I don't know. It was 10, 11 o'clock at night or something. They were through there. So it was an interesting guy to talk to. And
Turns out he's just another guy like the rest of us.
yeah,
Isn't he?
yeah. He really was. I said I never met. For some reason, she never got out of the airplane. She stayed in the airplane while all this was going on. But so I never saw her or met her. I saw her in the airplane. But it was,
What were your duties at Duncan Aviation?
basically, I was scheduling the airplane. They owned a bunch of airplanes they rented out.
Yeah, well, that's where I learned to, FIP was.
Yeah, that's when I did FIP at Lincoln Aviation too. But basically, that was just scheduling, collecting the money. I once in a while would help with the refueling. That wasn't really my job, but I would go out and help if needed or something. Run errands for the people that came through, like Paul Newman. If he wanted a bottle of whiskey, we'd go get him a bottle of whiskey. Doing stuff like that for the customers, customer service kind of stuff.
Did you ever continue flying as a civilian?
No, I got all my licenses, got all my ratings, everything up through multi-engine, all the ratings I could get, and instrument and all that stuff. I never did go back to really flying. About in 2004 or 5, I thought about it. I actually went and took a couple flights to get refresher flights to maybe start getting back into it, but it turned out that it just wasn't. I still liked it, but it was going to be, for what I was going to be able to do, it was going to be too expensive. Yeah,
that was my thought too. I was busy raising a family.
Yeah, and Jan wouldn't. One thing I really wanted to be able to do was go fly places like to the Reunion and places like that. To actually go do stuff rather than just fly around in circles. And I knew when I started, but I tried to tell myself that I could convince her of it. But it didn't take long, and I figured, she's never going to go fly with me. Something she'll fly an airliner, but she's not comfortable doing it. She would never get close to a small airplane with me, so I wouldn't be able to go do the things I wanted to do anyway. So why spend all that money and do that? I've gone we've got a friend that has an airplane. I've gone out with them a time or two and flown, but just basically as a passenger, not as the pilot. Still be fun to do, but just too expensive and not much fun doing it on my own.
Yeah, no, it isn't.
So that's just the way it is.
Anything else you'd like to share?
There might be. I just can't.
Okay.
This back to the flying thing. One of the things that I don't know if, I'm sure other people have done it, but something I think was pretty unique in my career was flying a KC-135, actually flying out of Fairford, England. We had a remote facility on Iceland. We'd go up to Iceland and spend a week or 10 days in Iceland doing alerts up there. So we were at Iceland on alert, and the crew, we were actually at the gym playing racquetball, and the ops officer came running in, told us to grab our stuff and get out to the airplane. So, we started, okay, well, we were all sweaty and stuff. We were going to get our clothes on. We started putting our flight suits on. Don't do that. Get out the airplane now. You've got to go now. So he took us out to the airplane in our gym clothes. We had our flight suits and boots and all that stuff with us, of course. You had to when you're on alert. But he took us to the airplane in our gym clothes and told us to get on and get started and go, and we could change clothes later.
Wow.
So I never heard of that happen before. So we actually got in a tanker, took off in gym clothes. We had our helmets on, of course,
Sure.
our headsets, but it was just amazing that we couldn't, that he even wanted us to do that, and not take the 5 minutes it would take to get dressed. But what the deal was there was a Learjet over someplace, had been over in Europe, that had climbed up to altitude, of course, and was going north, and they lost contact with it, but it was still flying. And it came up over England. They sent fighters up to check on it and stuff, and it just kept on going, and it would never contact anybody. And so they were going to send out a search for this airplane. That's what we were sent up there for. And so apparently they thought by radar that was getting close to where we were in Iceland. So they scrambled us, sent us up, and sent some fighters up to all. We were up there primarily to refuel the fighters if they needed. We were also while we were up there, part of the search looking for this airplane. Never found it. Nobody ever found it. Apparently it came down in the Arctic Sea someplace. But it's a few years later, maybe 15 years ago now or so, I remember the golfer, Payne Stewart. He took off from Florida someplace, got up to altitude, was cruising, and they lost contact with them. Probably lost cabin pressure, probably all, the passengers probably all passed out or something. They figured that's what happened. It was on autopilot, on cruise, and for some reason, they lost their oxygen or cabin pressure or had a heart attack or something.
Sure.
And they lost all contact, but the cruise control kept flying until it ran out of gas. I'm guessing that's what happened with this airplane, but the thing, I just couldn't imagine ever launching with gym clothes on. It was just, even the nuclear alerts, in the States, you always, whatever you're doing, you get dressed before you went out to go out to the airplane. It's just kind of a unique thing I've never.
Well, it certainly made an
Never
interesting
heard of
story.
before. Yeah, never heard of anything like that before, but a lot of interesting, fun times. And also in Iceland, not that event, but got to go out and fly formation with bear bombers and stuff. They were, formation is, again, that's an exaggeration. It wasn't, real close, maybe a mile or 2 miles off, but they used to come down to the strait there from Murmansk or someplace up on the northern part of Russia, going down to Cuba, and they flew north of Iceland there, and we would go up there. That's the whole reason we were up there in Iceland, is to monitor the bear traffic going down to the thing. So a couple of times we got to go up there and see the bears, fly with the bears going down to Cuba. We fuel the fighters that were up there for the same purpose.
Sure.
There's probably other stories.
Sure.
But
Well, we can do it the next time. I thank you much.
Yeah.
We
Well,
need to
thank you.
get to the Beer Rock and have lunch with the other classmates.
Yeah,
Thank you, Denny.
thank you.